Hello, Bookstew viewers and listeners. Here we are in yet another setting. This is the new podcast studio, and I'm so happy to welcome JoeAnn Hart to Bookstew. It's her third visit, and this is the book that we're going to be talking about. It's called Arroyo Circle, and it's a novel as opposed to the last book that JoeAnn was here for, which was a collection of short stories. Welcome, JoeAnn.
No, I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you for having me, Eileen.
So I have so many questions about this book. I loved the book, but one of the main theme that I picked up out of it is not enough versus too much.
Yeah.
And let's talk about. I'll let you introduce the two main characters.
Okay, so the two main characters, and there's maybe 3 or 4 points of view in the book, but the two big points of view are Shelley, who is a house manager for a hoarder. And so she is basically she just shops all the time. And then the other character is Les, who is an alcoholic NOAA scientist. He used to work at NOAA. As he says, he is still a scientist. It doesn't matter whether he's employed or not. And he lives in the creek behind her house. And it's set in Boulder. And so there's a big creek community in Boulder.
So why did you set it in Boulder? Because there are fires and there are floods. And certainly we know what's going on with floods these days, and we know about fires, but I mostly think of fires as being in California, not in Boulder.
Yeah, no, fires are huge in Colorado. It is a little unusual for them to come into the town of Boulder, but soon after I actually wrote The Fire Coming into Boulder, a fire came into Boulder.
So it's all your fault.
So
right?
yes, so nothing with weather and climate is impossible anymore. And there's a lot of fire in Colorado because it's just so much woods and the big long drought seasons. So it's a huge hazard.
Why did you set it in Boulder?
So Boulder, well, I used to live in Boulder in the late 70s, and that's actually where I met my husband, and then we moved back east. But my mother-in-law was still there. I had a lot of friends there. I was just there this summer for a memorial for one of them. And so I have been going back and forth from Boulder for 40 years. And so a friend of mine in Boulder was the one who sort of told me the anecdote of she was shopping for, she too was a house manager, and she was shopping for her boss. I don't think it was a hoarder, but she was shopping for her boss. But she was at McGuckin's, which is a hardware store. I needed it for other purposes to be at King Soopers. But she was at McGuckin's, and she put a big giant thing of kitty litter in the back of trunk of her car, and on the way home she was completely stopped and surrounded by police, and her home where her husband was surrounded by a SWAT team, and they that somebody had called 911 and said they reported that she put a baby in the trunk of her car. And so that's where it all came, and so there's a number of factors about why Boulder, but the fact that this had actually happened in Boulder went a long way to setting it in Boulder.
Because that's how we meet Shelley.
Yes.
Shelley's at King Soopers, and she is accused of that, saying that she was taking kitty litter, and apparently the carrier, a baby carrier, bore a resemblance to kitty litter. But unfortunately, there was a tragedy associated with it that I'm not going to go into. But I was totally intrigued by Shelley being a house manager for a hoarder.
Yeah. So
Shelley is divorced, and she's kind of got precarious finances in that she, after a tragedy that we'll talk a little bit about, she Airbnbs out her home and can only live there like in between Airbnb rentals, which means that she's, as Les is, she's kind of homeless, but Les, who is my favorite character, is kind of homed in a way in the Creek community because he has like a support system there. He's very wise about how to survive.
Right.
He's also an alcoholic, but so the idea, and Shelley is a house manager for Mimi, who is the hoarder. Your descriptions of the hoarding were very, very hard to read, hard to imagine. I mean, I know most of us have seen an episode or so of the
Yes,
show.
no, I have
Hoarders,
lived
but-
through this. This is, I had hoarding in the family, and so I have seen it firsthand. And no words do justice to how bad it really is.
and to the fact that it seems to have such a hold on people that there's almost no way to stop it. So Shelley's character, you know, she gets a job as a house manager, but really all she does is buy stuff and try to distribute it in a way that it doesn't collapse the house and smother Mimi, who's bedbound and just enjoys buying stuff.
Right. Yep.
So so there you've got Shelley, and then the first of the devastation starts with a fire, and the fire happens because everything that Shelley buys for Mimi comes in cardboard boxes, and the cardboard boxes have to be picked up, you know, frequently so they don't clutter the outside of the house. And the people who pick up the cardboard boxes don't make it 1 week, and oops, there's a fire and a fire starter, which is ironically, of course, all the Amazon, I'm sure, boxes that are piled up outside.
Yeah, that's right. It's a big comment on late stage capitalism, you know, just never being enough, never enough, just more, and that everybody just sort of getting their satisfaction out of life by shopping. But it's a pretty shallow, you know, you could, activity, because you just need it again. You know, you just need it again.
It's never fulfilled.
Yeah, and a lot of hoarders and even non-hoarding shoppers, it's like they never even open their bags at home or their boxes. It's, you know, or they open them, they never touch them again, because it's the activity, it's the excitement of buying something. And then after that, it means nothing, and it just adds to like the total environmental degradation of the world, you know?
So your books have all been centered around environmental issues.
Right.
How did you become, you know, I would call you an ecologist, unless that's not accurate, but.
Yeah. Oh, I would say I've always been an environmental activist, you know, actually since I was very young, in the 70s, when there was it was like the clean, where the sort of the first movement came as like sort of a cleaning, you know, like a trash and a littering. That was sort of like the very first big public service announcement things of starting to clean and just pick up stuff. And I mean, the world, it was just filthy. If you saw New York City in the 70s, it was pretty gruesome. And so it just really started from there. And I've always been active in politics, even from a young age. And so the two always went together. And so I've always been very active in environmentalism. It's always been very conscious always about, you know, what we take into the house and how we dispose of it. Is it disposable? And then actually my book Float, which was a novel, a dark comedy about plastics in the ocean, that just totally, or the research on that totally opened my eyes on the dangers of plastics. I mean, which is a petroleum product.
Right.
Which is, I'm not even sure I knew that before I started writing the it's a
And
petroleum.
now we've got like the microplastics in the ocean.
Right, that we all have plastics in us now, like a credit card's worth of plastic we eat every month or something. I mean, it's just, and it's a serious problem, because it's like plastics, what in the plastics are endocrine disruptors, and people having trouble getting pregnant, and there's huge cascade of issues. So yeah, so my books always do tend to dwell on what we have done to the planet.
So this, with fire and floods and COVID, I have to mention COVID because COVID for me was always a question. What were novelists going to do with COVID?
Right.
Were they going to ignore it? If you were going to try to ignore it, you had to set your story not during the COVID years, either after or before. So not only does this novel have floods and fires, but it also has COVID. And I thought Shelley has to go on a ventilator, and this is early on in the pandemic. And I thought your descriptions of her getting through COVID were just.
Yeah.
I mean, it was very vivid to me. And I have not heard it was a first person description of what surviving really bad COVID was like.
That was a lot of research. Amazingly, a little bit of wood here, I have not gotten COVID.
At all?
That I know of. So it's, but for one thing, COVID worked for me, for the novel. I mean, it did. I had started writing the novel 7 years ago, before COVID, but I knew a bit what was going to be happening. I don't plot out my novels too carefully because you have to let the characters, everything talk to you. But I knew that in the second half of the book that Shelley would be partially homeless. And then when COVID came, I was like, yes, because that really increased the stress and the conflict of her being out on the street.
And it also, the scenes in the hospital with her nurse was really, really vivid. So you don't only get Shelley's perspective, but you get what the nurses had to go through at the very beginning when nobody really, we think we're gonna put you on your stomach, but we think that will help.
Exactly.
And then the sight of refrigerator trucks outside the hospital.
How soon we forget
Yeah.
that those white refrigerator trucks were everywhere for a long time because they couldn't even process bodies quick enough. And so I have my daughter and my son-in-law are both doctors in the Boston area. My son-in-law is a geriatrician, and I remember when COVID was coming and he didn't, but it hadn't hit here yet, and he said, try to get COVID early so you can still get a bed and a ventilator.
Oh, yeah.
And so I knew, through the medical profession how bad things were, and I just did a lot of research. It was all there was on the news, you had to do. So I actually moved up that scene that you're talking about. I wrote that and it had made a short story before I needed it. I was still a couple years away from, or a year or so away from that, but because it was so immediate right then, early in the pandemic, and I just sort of needed to process what was happening, I wrote that scene, but and made it into a story earlier, and actually got picked up right away and has been anthologized twice.
Oh, what's the name of that story?
It's called Flying Home, and it was originally in Stone Coast Review, but it's also been anthologized.
Is Shelley in that? Or?
Yes, it's Shelley.
Oh,
It's that whole hospital scene, except by the time I actually got to that part in the book, things had changed.
Right.
I had some characters were in the short story that I had long ago gotten rid of, and things like that. But
so were there other short stories you in the past you've written a true crime novel,
right?
Short for the ones that we saw you on Book Stew,
right?
You joined me,
and
so a true crime novel, a collection of short stories, and then a full novel.
Right.
Are there other of your short stories that evolved into Arroyo Circle?
No, but there was the first chapter was had won a novel excerpt contest, and that was published early on. And then there were a couple little itty bitty tiny pieces, like just 3 or 4 pages here and there. No, and a longer piece, one of the fire scenes was in a Buddhist magazine. I'm probably forgetting. So yes, there were excerpts, but the hospitalization one was a real big story.
So then was Shelley the first character that came to you in
yes,
building
Shelley
the novel?
was the first character that I started writing down, but my brother had died in 2017. He died of alcoholism. and he had been homeless most of his life. So I really was writing the book for him. I mean, to sort of discover, like, what was that like to be a homeless alcoholic, and just to get into his head for a while, because I was in my grief. I just was like, so it's what writers do, work through grief and stuff. So it sort of started, even though I think on paper, Shelley, with that anecdote about the putting the kitty litter in the car, came first, but I knew that there was Les who lived behind, and then he became, a bigger character.
So Les, will you do a reading for us?
Yes. I'll
but
do that.
Les, I have to tell viewers and listeners, is he used to work at NOAA.
Mm-hmm.
He was a cloud scientist, which I
Yes.
thought was so interesting.
Yeah.
What was the name of a cloud scientist again? I know I wrote
God,
it down.
I forget.
Wait, let me
something.
find it, because nephrology.
Nephrology.
I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but he was an expert in clouds.
Right.
But his living a homeless life, his understanding how to get people to give him money as he sat on the street. There's a kind of funny, sad part. There's a cat involved in this, and when Shelley is in the hospital with COVID, Les is out on the street with a sign and with Shelley's cat that says, need money, need dollars for kibble. And he told Shelley once she was out of the hospital that, Spree, the cat, had kind of financed his ability to, but he also, well, why don't we hear your reading about Les, and then we'll talk some more about him.
Okay. Would you like me to read?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Here we go. Okay, so this doesn't really need any back story, and I'll just read a couple of pages here. Les sat cross-legged under eerie orange skies like on a distant planet, watching the pyrocumulus clouds billow from the vents of hell in the canyon, rising up over the foothills, the fire now forming its own weather. No, not a distant planet, but our own grim future, here at last. He heard mangy street dogs barking up and down Pearl, defending the indefensible. High noon and street lights flickering on. A Hindu Purana falls into his brain pan. When this era comes to an end, the world will be set ablaze by the sun god, then drowned by centuries of unbearable rain. Fitting end for a species fueled by fire, he announced to an ant head-butting the grape seed he'd wedged in a pavement crack. Flame on demand was a hot idea back in the Ice Age, as we, squatted around the first human fires. Such delicious warmth, and portable to boot. Put humans on the move, expanding their niche north, taking their own hot sun with them. Keeps the saber-toothed beasts at bay, too. One day, a hunk of bloody mammoth meat fell in the sacred fire, starts the glands salivating. Cooked food, pre-digested by heat, begets the fat human brain and skinny gut. Energy goes to thinking, not digesting. Modern humans not possible without combustion. Now combustion about to make humans impossible. What goes around comes around and around. The more it burns, the more it will burn. In a pocket, the discovery of a crumpled cigarette. Ignites it with a match. Breathes it in, blows it out. Instant dragon. Starbucks cup out on the pavement in front of him. A service to the community. Not a beggar, as Officer Sokos calls him. Certainly not a vagrant. He has a home. It is all around him. He stares into middle distance, not trying to catch eyes, third eyes or otherwise. As a rule, he lets earthly existence happen to him, although, since he needs his sips, he has to give it a little nudge now and again. A hand-scrawled sign is neatly propped up against his knees. I am the lily of the field. I am the bird of the air. Passerby smile and toss pocket change, missing the small target of the cup, since no one wants to get too close. Dimes and quarters hit pavement and bounce, rolling off a little distance. Les does not go after them, letting coins gather round his person as if he were a golden idol. If other homeless come to collect, let them. It was all one. But a dollar bill, hands off. He'll make a grab for one before it gets airborne. It would be like letting a sip blow away, especially on a day like this, the katabatic winds coming sideways on the slope. One house near Flagstaff Mountain was smoldering, spewing billows of suppressed energy up into the troposphere. The sun cut through the smoke in slanting rays like a scene from the Old Testament, and not in a good way. It was probably never in a good way. I'll stop there.
Les's philosophizing, which I think, like, I immediately had a mental picture of him. Of, there's not a lot of physical description of what he looks like, but somehow I had, your writing was so vivid that I had an image of him in my head. I'm not going to go into the end for him and Shelley, but how realistic do you think, I mean, I'm asking this, a week after the catastrophic hurricane, and in places that, Asheville, North Carolina, that you would never expect to experience this. What are you thinking about? Are things getting better? Are things getting worse? Are we staying on top of it? Are we drowning? In general?
Yeah, so in general, we're not staying on top of it. We're not doing nearly enough. No countries meeting their carbon goals. More than that, though, climate change takes place sort of in past tense. That what the weather that we are experiencing now is created by carbon put into the atmosphere 20 to 30 years ago. So there is a big time lag. So even if we were to go to zero carbon emissions today, we've got like 2 or 3 decades behind us of affecting our climate coming ahead of us, of all that carbon. So there's that. So no matter how much we try to slow or stop the carbon emissions, which are creating all these incredible storms, yet another bad hurricane coming into Florida. The Asheville was not even in the way of the hurricane, but got the rains. And the trouble is with all these intense rains, I mean, whoever heard of like 12, 16, 20 inches of rain in a day? It's because the warmer air and the warmer oceans, the air now can just hold so much more moisture. And then it becomes such a heavy system, it can't even move. It's just this big, heavy, and so wherever that system lands is just going to be devastated. And so places like Asheville, where everybody thought they were safe.
Well, mountains,
right?
Maybe forest fires or something, but not floods.
Yes, and but in mountains, all the streams are in the valleys, and the water goes rushing down the mountains and immediately fill up the streams, which become roaring tides.
So, I mean, does it make sense? So, I grew up on a barrier island that was pretty much leveled with Superstorm Sandy, but they rebuilt. They put houses up on stilts.
That's crazy.
I love my hometown, but nobody should be living there anymore.
Nobody should be living there.
So, but if it can, my feeling, the scariest part is if it can happen in Asheville, it can happen and will probably happen anywhere. So it's not like there's a safe place to go anymore.
No. Although I think that NOAA might have determined that there is like this one town in Wisconsin. Anyway, it's like way inland, and it's like, so sort of there are areas that the Weather Service consider like safe, and that eventually like that will be like the high ground.
So we all better. So you have to share the name of the town so we can all
eventually
move there.
It'll be insurance companies who decide who can rebuild and who can't. I mean, rebuilding on a barrier island. Barrier islands are meant to move. I mean, they are not, regardless of weather, barrier islands are meant to shift up and down the coast, and so building on them in the first place is crazy. So insurance companies will be the decider of who gets to live where.
Oh, it's all very depressing. Do you have any sense of hope about anything?
I do have hope. I do, and I believe that there's hope in the book, and that, we're a very clever species. That we got ourselves into this problem. I think we can get ourselves out. We have all the technical know-how. We know what to do. We know how to stop this, but it takes political will. It takes enormous political will. It takes global political will. It takes all countries working together. So we know what's going to happen. The models hadn't shown that it would happen so soon. This is actually the scariest part, is that it's all happening now, sooner than any of the models had thought. The glaciers melting, everything is moving quite rapidly. So we know how to stop it. We know what to do. We know, going to alternative energy, getting away from petroleum products. We know everything, but we have to do it.
Yeah, we just don't have.
We just have to
don't really have the will.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard for humans to change.
Well, I'll give an example and point the finger at myself. I took a trip to Texas, and when I got to the rental counter, the agent said, so have you driven an electric car before? Mm-hmm. And I have not, and I don't own one. And I could feel myself panicking, like I have to go across Texas to see other friends. What do I do if, how do I do this? And she must have seen my face, because I must have been terrified. And she said, it's okay, we have a gas car. And so I had a gas car, and I didn't really have to worry about it. But the idea that there was something that I could have done some good, something better, and I couldn't do it because I was scared.
I would say that's normal anxiety with an electric vehicle, because the infrastructure is not there. All the charging,
Texas,
and they need fast charging stations.
Right.
But they need to be everywhere where gas stations are, and that's not there yet. So, I'm still in a gas car. My car is 7 years old, and my next car will be an electric vehicle. So, and I just keep holding on to my gas car, waiting for them to improve the battery so that I can get to New York and back, I can get to Vermont and back. So, I went to Vermont for the eclipse, and all along the way home, when the traffic was just so intense, there were electric vehicles just dying because there was no
place to charge.
And had not anticipated, that a 3-hour trip would take 7 hours, and there was no place for them to go.
Well, even charge. Vermont. So my husband volunteers with Team Rubicon, which is a group of veterans that goes into disaster areas and helps with they only go to like economically depressed areas. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, they're going to be all over North Carolina and the South coming up. But they spent the summer in Vermont because there was so much flooding in Vermont. And I used to think that New England was like a haven. Right. Like we would be okay. Well, yes, there's the oceans, but as long as you don't live next to the ocean, we don't have like a Mississippi River or anything like that.
Exactly.
But look, Vermont, it was little creeks
that
were flooding.
That washed, and the water damage, the mold, everything. But that's how, it's called Arroyo Circle, in fact, because arroyos, and thank you for pronouncing it right. I haven't found anybody in the East who knows how to pronounce it yet. Including my publisher apparently didn't even know until fairly. She goes, how do you say that? I mean, they're like 2 months ago, whatever. Arroyos are empty beds, but that they can fill like in a second to floodwaters. I mean, look at the Grand Canyon. I mean, that didn't happen with just a trickle. Right. It's because mountains collect all snow and water, just rain coming down, and it all gathers into this little tiny crevice of a valley, and there's your flood.
So when you say that Arroyo Circle, took 7 years to write, at what point did you think you were finished? Did you say, I gotta just get this finished? How did that process work?
So even 7 years, it's not so continuously. I do like step aside and like write a short story, as I did with that, using those characters, and I do other essay writing and book reviews. But I was still pretty steady. It takes a long time to do a novel, and so I've already forgotten the question.
Oh, about like what point did you get to where you knew it was time to stop?
Yeah, because that was an easy one. I mean, I sort of knew, and the second it was done.
Did you know how it was going to end?
You know,
at the beginning?
I didn't know. But that's not unusual for me or any novelist. You try
but isn't
not.
That scaring? I mean, because again, we were talking about novels versus short stories.
Yeah.
Short stories they're very finite. I think when you sit down and write them, you almost have to go, okay, you have to think of your ending ahead of time because it can't go on like a novel can.
Right. Yes. I knew that ending probably halfway through. I knew vaguely what the ending was, and then it had to just keep changing as things changing. But I knew who was going to live and who wouldn't live by the end. So.
Well, we're running low on time. I just wanted to ask you one more question about your publisher here is called Green Writers Press. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Speaking of
Vermont, yes. It's a woman-owned press in Brattleboro, Vermont, and it's a press for environmental and social justice issues, and some Vermont things as well. And just they're fairly big for a small press. The book that's coming out at the same time as mine was actually on psychedelic medicine. So it's Vermont. So Vermont.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
So what's next up for you?
So what's next for me? I've been writing a connected series of short fiction. That having said that, it seems like I'm so prolific with High Wire Act last year, but short stories, those were written over 15 or 20 years, collected and sent out for a contest. So I'm not that prolific. So I am writing short stories that will be connected like a novel and stories, set slightly in the future, which is new for me.
Oh, good.
And,
Well, I love connected short stories.
Oh, yeah, I like them too.
And it must be easier to write than a novel in a way.
It is easier to write.
You still got to connect everything up.
Yeah, sort of, but like Elizabeth Strout, she
that's
always does.
That's of course my dream of connected short stories. Right. So I want to thank you for coming back to Book Stew third time. And when approximately do you think we can expect to see you again?
Oh, for the next book?
Yeah.
Oh, no, probably not. It won't be in probably a few years, probably 3 years.
All right. Well, we'll say I will definitely save a spot for you.
Oh, great.
So, viewers and listeners, I really want to recommend so highly Arroyo Circle.
Yeah.
It just came out.
Just came out last week, October 1st. Yeah.
So look for it in bookstores. Hopefully soon in libraries.
Yeah.
And thanks again, JoeAnn, for writing a fascinating book and for being such a great guest.
Oh, thank you so much, Eileen.
Okay, everybody. Maybe next month in November I'll be in yet a different studio, but I'll be here. So have a good night.